pleasure of listening. Easy for listening. I was able to do it. Easy for dancing. I'm not a great lover of cats. That's my fear.
You're a disgrace, you are.
Not me. That's my fear.
You're a disgrace, you are.
Hello and welcome to One-on-One Shadowboxing Have Your Say. Today our guest is Scott Ludlam, who is re-elected for the Senate. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you.
How do you feel after the election?
Oh, really pleased. Really pleased by the way that it came together. The whole campaign was very strange, having to run it twice, and I was a bit concerned that people were really exhausted after last year and maybe a bit dispirited and down, but people really came out for us, and we've had a great result.
The Greens WA also experienced some decline in the last year's election. As we know, we used to have 7, 5, now we got 2 in Parliament in WA.
In state parliament, we did have a very substantial setback last year in the state election, and again, it's been tough to come back and recover from that. We're looking now towards the state election in 2017 about building a very strong Greens team, and Lynn and Robin are doing a great job maintaining our presence there. But there's no question at all, given the amount of damage that Colin Barnett's doing, how unpopular he is, I think there's grounds for a very strong state Greens campaign for 2017.
So what's your hopes are, guys, coming back in the next election?
I'd like to see us run a very strong campaign, upper house, lower house. The urgency of the issues that we're working on are such that I don't think we can afford to simply maintain ourselves as an upper house party. I'd like to see us crack into the Legislative Assembly and really be able to take the fight up to government and put alternative proposals forward.
So what was the reason, seems to you, on the drop back last election?
I think in a way it was seen as, there was not a great deal of interest in the campaign. It was seen that Colin Barnett was a very safe pair of hands. People don't necessarily like him, but he was seen as being very safe. They'd adopted some important Greens policies like light rail, and I think that tends to take some of the vote away from us when governments pinch your policies. And it's also what we hope will happen, that our ideas will be taken up and adopted. And then straight after the election, and we've seen it, this rolling program of excuses, apologies, blunders. The light rail project has been killed. The state is very substantially now in debt. We're getting a stadium instead of support for homeless people, and there's no progress at all on renewable energy. In fact, energy bills are going up for people. So I think the opportunities for us now are much greater.
So why was the loss by the Greens again in Tasmania? Which was also a big kick.
Yeah, it was. And again, losing 2 MPs is hard. Good MPs, good staff then lose their jobs. And then you've got to go through a process of rebuilding. And in Tassie, I think we'd been seen as being associated with a 4th-term Labor government that was pretty clapped out, pretty tired. They dissociated from us right at the end of the term and said it's not because we've done anything wrong, it's just people don't like you. So the Labor Party took a big step back. But, the Tasmanian Party, people have been trying to wipe us out there for 20 years and we keep coming back stronger. So I think our colleagues there are in a rebuilding phase at the moment. In Tasmania, when the major parties colluded to change the electoral system to try and wipe us out, our representation in Tassie fell to 1 MP. And then, of course, they built it back up to 5. So it's a setback, but people declare the Greens dead about once every 6 months for the last 25 years, and we continue to grow.
As we heard now, the Greens and the Labour and also Liberals are working very hard on changing the rules and regulations of the elections. Why is that?
For the Senate?
For the Senate, yeah. Why is that, and what do you think about that?
We'll see what happens. It's not a perfect proposal at all, but actually it's the Senate, the change to the Senate voting model that's come forward is very close to what the Greens have been proposing for years. So we have a system at the moment where the ability to allocate your preferences in the Senate, you've got 2 choices. You can either trust the parties and just put a 1 and hope for the best, or you can number 1 to 77 on a ballot paper that's a metre wide. And when very few people do that, less than 5% of people bother. So effectively what is being done is that very powerful preferential system is being handed off to the parties, who in turn handed off to backroom preference negotiators and dealers who spend, you know, a month on mobile phones saying, if you give us this, we'll give you that, and all these deals that go on. And what that's allowed in the last 2 or 3 federal elections, at least, is for parties with tiny representation, no policies to speak of, who are all formed at the same time, cross-preferencing each other in these deals that have absolutely nothing to do with the intention of the voter. So our plan since about 2010, our proposal has been, why don't we allow people to number their own preferences across the top of the ballot paper for the Senate? You choose 1 Greens, you choose 2 WikiLeaks, you choose 3 Pirates, maybe you vote 1 to 6 and then you stop. And the only people that puts out of business are the preference dealers. So you've taken the power of voting out of the hands of the preference dealers, put it back into the hands of voters.
So everything go above the line?
Everything above the line. If you want to, you can still vote below the line. But I think what we would see is a much more democratic voting system. You'd see the small parties or the micro parties like Pirates or WikiLeaks or the church parties that have a proper position, or, you know, a platform and a view and proper party structure would continue. But these tiny little shell parties that don't really exist, they've all got the same membership and they only really exist to cross-preference each other, I think you'd find they would disappear.
So what is the suggestion by you guys on the number of party members?
I wouldn't like to see the party membership go up. I think that would be deliberately designed to attack smaller parties, and the Greens obviously started off as a micro party. So I think 500 is about right. I think you could potentially put some rules in about you're not allowed to form up 5 parties that all have the same membership, the same secretary, no AGM, no policies. That's dodgy. But the idea about increasing party membership to 1,000 or even higher, I think that's a deliberate attack on micro parties. I wouldn't want to see that. Anything that increases financial barriers, membership barriers, or any other kind of legal barriers to forming a party, I think is very, very problematic. So we've got to separate out. We want to encourage diversity because goodness knows that's really what we need in a political space at the moment. We want to discourage rorting and manipulation of people's preferences. So it's just about putting the power back into the hands of the voters.
Now, obviously, in WA, we got Clive Palmer's so-called puppet get into the Senate without any thinking or policies or representation. What do you think, how can you work together with those guys in the Senate, or any discussions you got with Palmer United?
Well, we've had no discussion with the Palmer candidate because we've been unable to contact him. And as you'd be well aware, Mr. Wang comes across, to my view, as actually quite sensible. In the very small number of interviews you've seen him do, he comes across as quite sensible. But he made some statements during the campaign about the renewable energy target, which I thought, again, were sensible. And the very next day, Clive Palmer contradicted him, shut him down, and he wasn't seen again for the rest of the election. He wasn't allowed to speak at his own press conference, and he's effectively being quarantined and kept from the public who just elected him. I think that is actually quite dangerous. Now, the fact is, come the 1st of July, when we all go back, those people will take their seats, we'll be in the same room, we can introduce ourselves, we can organise meetings and find out what their policies are, and we will work with anybody. That's the role of parliamentarians in a debating chamber. If, for example, we can work with Clive Palmer on getting refugee children out of detention, we will absolutely do so. And that seems to be his view. So we will do that. If we can work against Clive Palmer to stop his nickel refinery gushing millions of tonnes of poisonous waste into the Great Barrier Reef, we'll be doing that as well. You've got to take each issue separately.
So what do you think, Scott, how Palmer Party get this success in WA?
They spent a ton of money on TV advertising. And they ran some very clever, very simplistic slogans about things that they couldn't possibly deliver. And they took those simple slogans and they rammed them down people's throats on TV, and they spent millions of dollars.
So it's money.
I don't know what else there is. And some clever lines, you know, some not
Popular,
just money.
Yeah.
They spent a lot of money in Tassie and won nothing and did very, very poorly. So it's not just money.
So the rhetoric of Clive Palmer worked better in WA?
It did. He told people he was going to fix the system of GST receipts. He has no way of doing that. He has no idea how he's going to do that, and he doesn't care particularly. But it sounded good, And if you can get it down into a really simple soundbite that the eastern states are ripping off WA and he's got a plan to fix it, and you just repeat that in 15-second spots and you spend millions of bucks, you can win a Senate seat.
So on that note, Scott, how do you see donations for the parties, and anything need to be done to make the system more equitable?
Quite a few things, to be honest, quite a bit.
Such as?
The reporting threshold, so we won't find out until probably November who funded last year's election, and I don't understand why that would take so long. You should have rolling disclosures effectively within a few days of the donation being accepted. That should be disclosed. I don't think that's too much to ask. I think you should also look, in New South Wales they've banned property developers, for example, so we've got direct contamination and corruption of politics from a particular industry sector, whether it be oil and gas or property or financial industry. Bringing the threshold down very sharply so that you can't donate more than a certain amount of money.
What you envisage, what sort of threshold will be healthy?
Because
lots of people think different.
Yeah, and I don't have a fixed view. At the moment, it's uncapped.
Yes.
I think you could take it down to maybe $10,000 or $25,000, disclose it straight away. That would be a good start. And then look at the possibility of increasing public funding to everybody, not just to the majors, but to the minors and indeed to the micros as well. If the function of an electoral system is to bring forward into the public view the largest, most diverse number of political voices,
yes,
so that the public can assess, who's serious and who's not, then I think a better way of doing that actually is to get the corporate money out of politics, a modest increase in public funding, but make sure it's spread evenly across the whole playing field so that you can get the maximum number of voices. Now, not everyone can get elected, but at least it encourages diversity.
So the combination of the new Senate, in your opinion, how the Senate can work now and balance the power and check?
It's a very good question. I honestly don't know. We will have never seen a combination of an extremely complex Senate with the largest number of crossbenchers that I think would ever have been in there. Clive Palmer pulling strings from the House of Reps to his Senate team on the other side of the building. People whom we know almost nothing about, and a Prime Minister who's a terrible negotiator. How is Prime Minister Tony Abbott going to get his agenda through that Senate? He's a terrible negotiator. And if you go back a couple of years, Prime Minister Julia Gillard, for all her flaws, was an excellent negotiator. She put the cards on the table, and when you signed an agreement with her, the agreement stayed signed. With Tony Abbott, I think it's a completely different scenario, and I have no idea how he proposes to get his legislation through the Senate, particularly when so much of it is so bad.
Scott, we have to go for a short break, but please stay with us, because after the break we're coming back with more discussion with Scott Ludden and the future of politics in Australia.